Think Nouri al-Maliki will get a third term in office despite what many think is an explicit veto by Donald Trump.
It's Maliki versus Trump now, and Trump has the upper hand.
Welcome to this week's Iraq Briefing, where we discuss the top stories shaping Iraq today. I am Omar al-Nidawi with Enabling Peace in Iraq Center, EPIC, and I'm once again joined by my friend and visiting senior fellow here at EPIC, Ahmed Ali. How are you doing, Ahmed?
Doing wonderful, and it is terrific to be on Iraq briefing.
Today, we ask the question: will Nouri al-Maliki get a third term in office as prime minister, despite what many consider to be an explicit veto by US President Donald Trump? Last week, the Coordination Framework nominated former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki to be its candidate to be the next Prime Minister of Iraq. This happened 2 weeks after the incumbent, Mohammed al-Sudani, whose party actually won the most seats in parliament, decided to step aside from the competition and allow Maliki to be the frontrunner. Maliki's nomination has faced a lot of opposition, both within Iraq and from external parties, including the United States. Most recently, President Donald Trump sent a very blunt and very forceful message telling the coordination framework that they have made a very bad mistake by nominating Noor al-Maliki for a third term. Now, Ahmed, is Maliki really as bad as his opponents, including Trump, say he is? And in your opinion, what are the main risks that a third term for Maliki brings to Iraq and to US Iraq relations?
That's a great question, Omar. Maliki has a long public track record in governance and in being in office and also a public political figure. It goes back exactly 20 years ago. He has many detractors within Iraq, within the region, within Washington as well. And at the same time, he has loyalists, people who he put in office in Iraq during his 8 years as prime minister. So there is a lot to talk about when it comes to Nouri al-Maliki or Abu Isra as Iraqis call him. And I think the problem that a lot of people see with him is that during his term and even when he was out of office, there was no ability to implement any political reform in the country because his governance style was a heavy-handed governance style. That's the best way to put it. And he was heavy-handed with all rivals. You didn't have to be an Iraqi Sunni or an Iraqi Kurd to be his rival. He is very politically ambitious and he wanted and still wants to fulfill that ambition. Many of his detractors, therefore, see problems with his governance and with him returning to office. The second big problem that he faces is that even though he has, I would call a mixed record when it comes to handling relations with Tehran and with the Iranian government, but he's still seen as close to the Iranian government. And I think, especially since he left office in 2014, which, by the way, was also a bit of a move forced by Washington back then during the war against ISIS. Since he left office in 2014, his relations and his interlocutors have mostly been Iranian figures or political groups close to the Iranian camps. And I think as a result, he didn't win a lot of friends over the last 12 years that he has been out of office as prime minister. And I think the third big problem internally for him as well is that people are afraid of sectarian policies when he gets into office. And Maliki and his records show that, especially towards the end of his second term between 2010 to 2014, he initiated many policies that you and I, Omar, were watching very closely, and that many see and many attribute the rise of ISIS to those policies. So there's a lot of problematic, past with him. I think the interesting thing with him, though, is that he has tried to present a different image, but people are not buying that different image at the moment.
Mhm. Yeah, and I may add that one of the, I think, main features or characteristics of Maliki's style is this, people consider it paranoid conspiratorial attitude. He always talks about conspiracies being weaved to unseat him or to undermine the Shia community in Iraq or to undermine the political system in Iraq. And it has characterized also his approach towards, I think, a lot of Iraq's regional Iraq's neighbors in the region. Most recently, I think he accused the new government in Syria, as being a puppet of Israel and Turkey, which I think has a lot of people worrying about the future of, relations between Iraq and Syria at a very, very difficult, I think, junction, especially with serious security concerns around what's happening right now in Syria and the possible of a resurgence by ISIS. But I digress. Going back to the domestic political situation that led to Maliki's nomination and the situation that we're in right now, I read a lot of analysts or a lot of analyses saying that what happened was a plot by Mohammed al-Sudani, by the incumbent, who wanted to put Maliki in a position, basically under the spotlight, in order to get rid of him, to basically shine a light on Maliki's weaknesses and problematic past in order to discredit him. What's your assessment? Do you think, there's truth to that?
Sudani is certainly a shrewd politician, and he, as you stated, has the ambition for a second term. So I do believe it is likely that Sudani played a role in this dynamic and in creating the conditions for Maliki to be rejected, particularly by Washington. At the same time, I think if this was Sudani doing it completely, I do think it's going to backfire on him as well, because as much as relations with Washington are important for Baghdad, and this is why President Trump's position is resonating in Iraq to a great deal. It will be difficult for Sudani to be seen as totally an American candidate in office in Baghdad. Therefore, if the future is Sudani in office again, I think he'll be under a lot of pressure to appear not as Washington's candidate, but as an Iraqi candidate or somebody who is able to balance relations between Washington and Tehran, and I think that remains to be seen, because you still have a situation in Iraq where internal politics dictates a lot of what will happen moving forward. I think in our last Iraq briefing, we did talk about the dynamism of Iraqi politics, and this is exactly what we're seeing with this situation, and we'll continue to see moving forward. The challenge for Sudani is that there's clearly other candidates for the prime minister position who can play this balancing role between Baghdad and Tehran and Washington at the same time. So a lot remains to be seen with this situation. And I also think if this was Sudani, what we know about Maliki and his one of his other characteristics is that he does hold grudges. So if this was Sudani, he will try to do everything to prevent Sudani from getting a second term.
Hmm. And it seems to me that the alignments within the coordination framework are rather fluid, and which means, of course, the pendulum could swing in either direction, with just one or two players changing their mind about the situation. So, where do things stand right now? Who is supporting Maliki and who is opposing him within the coordination framework?
Based on what we know, it appears that the better organization supported Maliki. Other coordination framework factions close to Iran, such as Kitab Sayyid al-Shuhada, also supported Maliki's nomination. On the other hand, there was clear opposition by Asab Ahl al-Haq, which is one of the biggest winners of the elections, and it has up to 28 seats in the parliament. So it does have a decisive role in the political process moving forward. And the other opponent to a second Maliki term was and I think still is the Hikmah trend, headed by Ammar al-Hakim, which is also a major Shia group that has good relations with Washington and also with Tehran. And that's why this decision by the coordination framework is not necessarily a smooth sailing decision, as if we can say so, because there wasn't consensus on Maliki to begin with, and that lack of consensus will work against Maliki now if he wants to keep fighting for the prime minister position.
Right. And we know that nomination is never really the end of the road. There are a lot of obstacles that are to be, passed before a nomination becomes a designation, before that leads to government formation. And I remember in 2020, there were two
Mm.
politicians who were actually designated by the president to lead government formation, and both failed. I think Muhammad Alawi and Adnan al-Zurfi. That was in the aftermath of Adil Abdel Mahdi's resignation. So technically, the next step in government formation is the election of a president who would then task the nominated candidate to form government. And this process has actually been rather deadlocked between the two main Kurdish parties. What is happening there? Can you explain really what's delaying the decision here?
So the presidency is also a significant position. I don't think it is a symbolic position as as it is dictated. It just depends on who occupies the position and what they want to do with it, because it does have powers. And I think you and I, Omar, and other long-term Iraq observers, we were able to see what, for example, Imam Jalal, President Jalal Talabani, was able to do with the position, despite what some of the limitations from the constitution on the position and the responsibilities of the position. So it is actually a significant position, and it's also a significant position when it comes to internal Iraqi Kurdish politics. And that significance is what is delaying the process at the moment. You do have two major candidates still standing, one from the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. He's a former minister. His name is Nizar Ahmedi. And on the Kurdistan Democratic Party side, you have Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein, who is well known, I would say, throughout the world, and particularly in Iraq. And there doesn't seem to be an agreement on who will be the president among the Kurdish parties to begin with. And if that agreement happens, when it happens, it will determine the voting by the blocs. All the other blocs are waiting for the Iraqi Kurdish parties, KDP and PUK in particular, to decide on the candidate, and then they will vote based on that. The second scenario in this process, if you don't have agreement among the KDP and PUK, they may both decide to put it on the parliament floor and have a vote on those candidates. And I think that process is usually complicated. We saw a mini episode on that process with the election of the second deputy parliament speaker, also between the KDP and other Kurdish groups in Baghdad. And the KDP won at the end of the day, if we can say that, but it took a lot of work by the KDP to get that position. For the presidency, because of its significance, I think if they decide to put it on the parliament floor and have a vote on it without an agreement, we will see, I think, another dramatic episode about who can be president. So there's a lot to see with that process, and the discussion is about this Sunday or perhaps next week at some point. Early signs is that that may not be possible.
It seems like it's possible that a decision on the presidency might not become possible until the KDP and PUK actually decide on the future of the next KRG cabinet. That's potentially the precondition for an agreement on the presidency. Is that correct?
That is the other big factor, is that this is definitely tied to the KRG formation as well. And that process, if we're being generous, has been delayed for for a good year and a half now, or so. So all of these are tied certainly, and I think this shows you the complexity of Iraqi Kurdish politics in particular at this point.
Yeah, and speaking of complexity, um, as an Iraq watcher analyst, it was rather confusing to me to see, or surprising to me to see that the both the KDP and the PUK, especially the KDP, welcomed Maliki's nomination and showed really preference to Maliki over Sudani. And given the histories involved, given how the hostility that Maliki had shown towards Kurdish politics, towards Kurdish politicians and Kurdish interests in the past, I don't know what explains this. Do you know why the KDP decided to favor Maliki over Sudani this time?
I think Maliki, in a way, worked on rehabilitating his image over the last 12 years, and some of that was with the Iraq Kurdish groups, and particularly with the KDP and the KDP president Masoud Barzani. Maliki quickly visited Kurdistan after the election results and met with KDP president Barzani. All that outreach, I think, paid off for Maliki. In addition to that, I think there is a lot of realism that is dictating this political process. Maliki, as you I think eloquently stated, has a very controversial history with Kurdistan, and he began a lot of he implemented a lot of anti-Kurdish policies or anti-Kurdish
including mobilizing
attitudes.
military action at some point.
He was the first one to do it, yeah, exactly in 2008 in Khanaqin, which was unprecedented and showed a bit of Maliki's governance style. But I think the KDP is looking at it and thinking, okay, if the Iraqi Shia groups agree on him as a nominee, we have no problem with that. We don't think he is the ultimate decision maker for the prime minister position, and if we support him, he he can govern differently this time, because we do have to keep in mind is that back in between 2006 and 2014, Maliki was just dictating the whole political process. He was the main guy in charge, and that's why he created that rivalry with Muqtada Sadr, because Sadr was the other shot caller in Iraq. But Iraq in 2026 has multiple shot callers, if we can call them that, and multiple decision makers on the Shia side. So for the KDP, I think they read the Shia political scene and they are comfortable with Maliki being in that position, knowing that they can dilute his decision making or influence his decision making by reaching out to other Iraq Shia political groups who can influence Maliki's decision making.
Okay. I want to go back to Trump's message and the reactions to that. And I noticed that across the board, there was a focus on, rejecting this blatant foreign interference in Iraq's affairs. That you saw that most clearly in Maliki's own response, and also it was mentioned in the responses posted by other Iraqi political factions. Uh, do you think that Trump's very strong, rough around the edges language has kind of cornered the coordination framework? Has he made it actually more difficult for them to back out from this situation? Looking at it, it seems that for them to now withdraw the nomination or to reverse the nomination of Maliki will look very weak. So how are they going to handle this? Did Trump inadvertently make it difficult for them to reverse the decision? Is what I'm asking, I think.
I don't think Maliki is being seen as a hero in Iraq at the moment, and President Trump's position is not giving him that opportunity because there is a lot of skepticism about Maliki from all kinds of Iraqi politicians. It's not just Iraqi Sunnis or Iraqi Kurds, even among the Iraqi Shia. So Maliki is not looking like the hero right now because of President Trump's position. Uh, I think that coordination framework is working at the moment to find a way out of this situation. And that's why you see a lot of messaging that yes, we want to protect Iraq's sovereignty and sovereign decision making. At the same time, if you look at the Iraqi press and unofficial spokespeople for Maliki or people close to Maliki, and even others, they are paving the ground for Maliki to withdraw his nomination on the grounds of prioritizing the national interest of Iraq. And that will give Maliki an off ramp essentially from his position, because there is a realization that it would be tough to get his nomination across. This doesn't take away from Maliki's negotiating ability, his political savviness, and his history of making a deal with anybody to get what he wants. But I think he is him and the coordination framework are in a very, very difficult position at the moment.
That reminded me that I noticed in the official response of the Reconstruction and Development Coalition, that's Sudanese own political party, it made an allusion to the outcomes of the political process or the outcomes of the democratic process in Iraq. And I saw that as a reference to the election results, which of course would have favored Sudani as the person who got the most seats. Do you think that the path is more open right now for Sudani to retake the lead and become the alternative? Is he now, you know, in a position to run unopposed?
I don't think so. I think Sudani, if he wants to get the nod to be the prime minister nominee, will have to outmaneuver all coordination framework elements. Some of those elements did not like him to begin with. They saw his term in office as detrimental to them in some ways, especially towards the last 2 years. So he has to negotiate with them. Getting the approval of all coordination framework elements is very difficult to do. And then he has to convince the Iraqi Kurds and the Iraqi Sunnis as well that he is a nominee. And I think there he might have some space in some ways, but he will be hard pressed, for example, by the Kurds to offer guarantees on the public sector salaries in Kurdistan, which he has delayed a number of times, and that has created a political crisis or political pressure on the KRG. And as we all know, Iraq's economy is not doing the best at the moment and will continue to have challenges. So any guarantee Sudani offers to the Iraqi Kurds will not be a solid guarantee. So that's one difficulty he has. The other difficulty is, yes, also convincing the Iraqi Sunnis, and he doesn't have the ability to do so, despite to be fair to him, despite some popularity he has with the Iraqi Sunnis. Sudan is because Sudan is not seen as a sectarian figure in the eyes of the Iraqi Sunnis.
Okay. So he's got his work cut out for him.
Yeah, he sure does, and this is why Iraqi politics is very dynamic. It doesn't stop.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you so much for all this analysis, Ahmed. This is it for this Iraq briefing, which complements our latest Iraq weekly report, the Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor, number 528. If you've enjoyed this analysis, please like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends who might be interested in staying up to date on events in Iraq. You can get our weekly updates on Iraq and other reports and analysis by visiting enablingpeace.org. Until next time, مع السلامة.